All right, so let's get into this deep dive about the Philippines. You guys really wanted to hear about this one. So we're going to unpack some of the things that Rick Shaw, an American expat who lived there for a while, talked about. He's got this YouTube channel where he shares his experiences, and he's really into the Philippines, but he's also really upfront about the not-so-fun stuff.
Yeah.
So whether you're just curious or actually thinking about going there, I think his perspective is super useful.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that he focuses on those risks that you might not consider right away. Like you said, it's a tropical paradise, right? But he actually got pretty sick a couple times. Once from an amoeba, and then later from dengue fever.
Well, amoeba. Seriously, like from the water? I know those can be bad news.
Yeah, so he thinks he got it from ice in a drink. He even tells this story about finding black fungus inside an ice machine at a restaurant.
Ugh, that's an image I didn't need. Okay, I'm officially off ice, so what's the advice here? Just never have ice.
Pretty much, yeah, just to be on the safe side. He also says to be careful with bottled water, like if the cap is loose or there's a paper towel over it, that could mean it's been refilled with tap water.
Oh, wow. I always just assume bottled water is fine. But I guess not always.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know. Okay, so no ice, double check the water bottles. Anything else to watch out for when it comes to what you're drinking?
Not for drinks specifically, but the other thing he got, dengue fever, that's spread by mosquitoes, and that can really knock you down for weeks, even months if it's a bad case. He actually lost a crazy amount of weight because he got dengue right after the amoeba thing. It was rough.
Oh, wow. That's scary. I mean, I've heard of dengue fever, but I didn't realize it could be that serious. What can you even do about mosquitoes in a tropical place?
Well, he mentions how people in the Philippines often store old tires on their roofs, and those can turn into mosquito breeding grounds. So yeah, screens on windows and doors are key, and keep those fans going to keep the mosquitoes away. And be extra careful at dusk and dawn when they're out the most.
So basically, just take every precaution you normally would, but times 10. All right, what else did he say was a potential danger?
Aside from the health stuff, he talks a lot about traffic. He says it can be absolutely nuts, like to the point where it affected where he wanted to live. He almost bought a house in an area called Chrysanthemum, but the commute every day would have been a nightmare.
Yeah, I've heard Manila traffic is legendary. What did he say about actually getting around?
He recommends tricycles. They're like little motorbike taxis, or those covered vehicles you see in Southeast Asia. I think they're sometimes called tuk-tuks. They can weave through traffic way easier than cars.
So tricycles and tuk-tuks it is, but wouldn't you still run into traffic at some point?
Oh, for sure. He just means it's better than sitting in a car during rush hour. He also mentions this thing about having to pay like 10 pesos to go through guard shacks in some areas.
Really?
Yeah, it's apparently normal in private communities or places with extra security.
Huh. Interesting. Guess every place has its quirks.
Totally. And speaking of quirks, he mentions stray dogs as a possible issue. Apparently they're all over the Philippines, and most of them are harmless, but they can be annoying, like getting into trash and making a mess.
Okay, so stray dogs, got it. Not exactly what comes to mind when you think of dangers, but yeah, I can see how that could be a pain. So we've got amoebas, mosquitoes, crazy traffic, stray dogs. Is there a common theme here? What's the big picture?
I think the important thing is that each of those requires a different kind of adjustment. With the amoeba and dengue, it's about being careful yourself and paying attention to your surroundings. With traffic, it's more about figuring out the local transportation and maybe changing your lifestyle a bit. And with the stray dogs, it's more about realizing that even small things can be different in a new place.
That's a good point. So it's not just about avoiding danger, it's about adapting to a new way of life, and that's where the real challenge is, right?
Definitely.
All right, I'm ready for more. What else did he say about adapting to life in the Philippines?
Welcome back. So I think what we're seeing with Rick's experiences is that adapting to a new place isn't just about the big stuff. It's about those everyday little differences. Those can really throw you off.
Yeah, totally. You have this picture-perfect image in your head, and then reality hits.
Exactly, like with the amoeba thing. It shows how important it is to really understand food and water safety in different countries. You know, in a lot of developing countries, the infrastructure and sanitation might not be what you're used to.
Right, and it's not just about being careful. It's about being informed, knowing what to ask, what to look for, how to, advocate for yourself.
For sure. It's about taking charge of your own health and safety. And speaking of health, Rick's experience with dengue fever brings up another important point. You need to be ready for health challenges that you might not face back home.
Yeah, dengue fever. I have to admit, I don't know that much about it. What are the symptoms? And how bad can it get?
Well, people often describe it as like a really bad flu. High fever, headaches, muscle and joint pain, sometimes even a rash. And in some cases, it can lead to complications like internal bleeding, which can be really dangerous.
Yikes, that doesn't sound good at all. So if you're living in or traveling to a place where dengue is common, what can you do?
Well, on top of the usual mosquito repellent and clothes that cover you up, it's super important to get rid of any places where mosquitoes can breed. Remember he mentioned those tires on rooftops? You see that in a lot of tropical countries. And those things can fill up with rainwater and become mosquito nurseries.
Right. Mosquitoes need standing water to lay their eggs. So I guess that means you also have to be careful about other things like buckets or containers left out in the open.
Exactly. And if you think you might have dengue fever, get to a doctor right away. Getting diagnosed and treated early can really make a difference.
Okay, good to know. So we've talked about health, but there was another thing Rick talked about a lot, the traffic. I mean, he decided not to buy a house because of it.
Yeah, traffic is a big issue in a lot of fast-growing cities, and Manila is definitely one of them. It's a complicated problem with roots in urbanization, infrastructure, economic growth.
But how does that actually affect people who live there? Is it really that bad?
Just imagine spending hours every day commuting to and from work. That can take a toll on you, your time, your energy, your mental health.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a major factor in choosing where to live, especially if you're used to a shorter commute. So it sounds like learning to deal with the traffic is a key part of adapting to the Philippines.
Absolutely. And it's not just about finding the quickest route, it's about understanding how transportation works there.
Like his tip about using tricycles and tuk-tuks.
Exactly. They're usually a lot better than cars, especially for short trips. Plus, they're like a classic Southeast Asia experience.
I love riding tuk-tuks when I travel. They're so much fun. Though I guess they might not be the most comfortable if you're stuck in traffic for hours.
True. It's about weighing the pros and cons, finding what works best for you. And sometimes it's about being adaptable, finding creative solutions.
Speaking of creative solutions, you mentioned earlier that Rick talked about paying to go through guard shacks. Can you explain that a little more? It sounds kind of strange.
It's actually pretty common in the Philippines, especially in gated communities or areas with a lot of security. Those fees usually go towards keeping the guard posts running and making sure residents are safe.
Oh, so it's like a mini toll,
Uh-huh.
but for security.
Exactly. It's just one example of how things can be different in another culture. It might seem weird at first, but when you understand why they do it, it makes sense.
I guess it's all part of the learning curve when you're somewhere new. You have to be open to things being different and try to understand the local context. But that's part of what makes living abroad exciting, right? Experiencing new things, broadening your horizons.
Absolutely. Even those everyday things like traffic and guard shacks can teach you about the culture and how people live in a new place.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Health risks, traffic, cultural quirks. What's the main takeaway for someone thinking about moving to the Philippines? Is it all bad?
Not at all. The Philippines is a beautiful country with amazing people, but just like anywhere else, it has its own unique challenges. The important thing is to know about those challenges, do your research, and go in with realistic expectations.
So be prepared, be informed, but also be open to new experiences and embrace the differences.
Exactly. Adapting to a new environment is a journey, and it's often the challenges that make it the most rewarding.
I like that. Now, I'm really curious to hear more about what Rick has to say about adapting to life there. What else can we learn from him? Welcome back to our deep dive on the Philippines. We've been talking about Rick Shaw's experiences there, and it's been really interesting to hear about what it's actually like for expats, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that moving abroad isn't just about the scenery and adventure. It's about really immersing yourself in a different culture and learning to navigate a whole new way of life.
You know, one thing that struck me about Rick's story is how much he loves the Philippines. He's clearly drawn to the people, the food, the beauty of the place. But he's also really honest about the tough stuff he went through.
Right, and that honesty is so important. It helps to give a realistic view for anyone thinking about doing the same thing. It's not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about understanding the whole picture.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, look, this place is awesome, but it's not always easy. You got to be ready for the unexpected, and you got to be willing to adapt.
And that adaptability is key, isn't it? Whether it's the climate, the food, the transportation, or even the cultural norms, being flexible and open to new experiences is essential.
Speaking of cultural norms, I'm curious about what Rick observed. Did he mention anything that might surprise or challenge someone from a Western culture?
One thing that comes to mind is his observation about time. He said Filipinos have a more relaxed attitude toward being on time. which can be tough for someone coming from a culture where time is very strict.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Filipino time, right? It's not about being rude. It's just a different way of looking at time.
Exactly. It's about understanding that different cultures value different things, and what might seem disrespectful in one culture is totally normal in another.
So again, it comes back to that adaptability, recognizing those differences and adjusting your own expectations of behavior. It sounds like communication and a willingness to learn are crucial.
Definitely. And being respectful of the local culture, even if it's not what you're used to, it's not about changing the culture. It's about finding ways to fit into it.
I think that's a really important point. Going in with humility, a willingness to learn, and appreciation for what makes that culture unique.
And that's where the real magic happens. When you step outside your comfort zone and embrace those differences, that's how you truly grow.
Earlier, we talked about stray dogs in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Rick considered them a potential hazard. Do you think that's accurate? Or is there more to it than that?
That's a good question. I think it's important to remember that the stray animal situation in many developing countries is complicated. It's often linked to things like poverty, lack of resources, and cultural attitudes towards animals.
So it's not just about the dogs themselves. It's about the bigger picture.
Right. And while stray dogs can be annoying or even dangerous sometimes, we need to approach the situation with empathy and understanding.
So it's about finding ways to live together. Yeah. Maybe supporting local animal shelters or encouraging responsible pet ownership.
Exactly. Finding solutions that are humane and make sense in the long run.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on the Philippines, what are the main takeaways for someone thinking about moving there or even just visiting?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to do your research. Don't just look at travel brochures or social media. Talk to people who have lived there. Get a real sense of the good and the bad.
That's good advice no matter where you travel. Don't just skim the surface. Immerse yourself and really get to know the place.
And specifically for the Philippines, be prepared to adapt. Embrace the slower pace of life, the cultural quirks, and the unique challenges that come with being in a developing country.
So it's about appreciating the beauty and the challenges, recognizing that both are part of the experience.
Exactly. And adapting to a new culture is a process. There will be good times and bad times, frustration and joy. It's all part of the adventure.
So any final advice for someone who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all this?
I'd say take it slow. Don't try to do everything at once. Focus on what you can control, like learning some basic Tagalog, reading up on local customs, or connecting with other expats who can help you out.
That's great advice. Break it down and focus on the positive.
Yeah.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There's a whole community out there who've been through it and are happy to share what they've learned.
And most importantly, don't forget why you were interested in the Philippines in the first place. Hold on to that sense of adventure and curiosity, that desire to experience something new.
Because that's what makes it all worthwhile. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on the Philippines. We hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little inspiring.
And if you ever feel unsure or overwhelmed, remember Rick's story. He had challenges, he made mistakes, but he also found a lot of happiness and fulfillment during his time there.
It just goes to show that with the right attitude and a little preparation, you can adapt to pretty much anything. So go out there, explore the world, and embrace the adventure.